Welcome viewers to American Politics, the hub of latest updates happening around you. More than 2 weeks into the war in Ukraine, and the unthinkable is not only being thought, it's being said out loud. Could Putin use nuclear weapons? The Ukrainian forces' tenacity in fighting back has been extraordinary, but could it make Putin even more dangerous? And what happens if he fails with conventional weapons? Will he use unconventional ones next? It's the right question. It's just 4 years too late. Please subscribe to our channel for more insightful updates. Because he's already used unconventional weapons. Not in Ukraine, but right here, in Britain. On 4 March 2018, Putin deployed a chemical weapon against a civilian population. Our civilian population. Us. The poisoning of Sergei Skripal may have played out in the British press as a botched assassination attempt, but that's just half of a more terrifying story. Because Salisbury is not just a pretty, quintessentially English market town with a famous cathedral, which Skripal's poisoners mocked us with when they claimed to have visited it. It's also a home to the British military establishment and some of its highest-ranking officers, adjoining the biggest military training ground in Britain, Salisbury Plain. And Putin struck at its heart. Was it Skripal he was after? Or Salisbury? Or, as it turned out, both. Because 2 Russian soldiers, military intelligence officers from the GRU agency, caught a commercial flight to London, sauntered down a Salisbury street without making any effort to disguise themselves, in full view of 100 or more security cameras, and released a deadly nerve agent. And then? Then they threw away the bottle. 3 months later, an Amesbury resident, Charlie Rowley, fished it out of a charity bin and gave it to his girlfriend, Dawn Sturgis. She died, agonizingly. This was a British citizen murdered by the Kremlin. But here's what's worse. What if she hadn't been given the vial? What if the bottle had gone to the charity shop? Or into a bin lorry? Or been crushed and taken to the tip? Or had entered the water table? In a recent interview, Fiona Hill, formerly the national security advisor on Russia to Donald Trump, makes her thoughts on the incident plain. There was enough nerve agent in that bottle to kill several thousand people, she said. It proved Putin was prepared to use any cruel and unusual weapon he has, she said. And he wants us to know that. He wants us to know that. And, by Hill's analysis, the poisoning of Sergei Skripal looks less like a botched assassination attempt and more like a botched terror attack. At the very least, it was a stark, unmistakable message from Russia to NATO, the very definition of hybrid warfare, a combined military and information operation. Certainly, governments around the world read it as such. It wasn't seen as an attack on NATO. There was unprecedented international cooperation. NATO agreed and imposed sanctions. Hundreds of Russian diplomats, spies, were expelled from embassies around the world. But what we now must recognize is that the British government's response to the Skripal poisoning, and specifically Boris Johnson's role in it, was a glaring national security failure. To understand this, we need to rewind a few months earlier. On 30 October 2017, the FBI made it known that its investigation into Russian interference in the US election, led by special counsel Robert Mueller, had begun in London. 2 days later, on 1 November, the Labour MP Chris Byron asked Johnson, then Foreign Secretary, whether he had seen any evidence of Russian interference in British elections. Not a sausage, he said. Yet 2 weeks later, Theresa May, then Prime Minister, made a landmark speech at the Lord Mayor's banquet. Russia, she said. We know what you are doing. And you will not succeed. She also detailed how Russia had mounted a sustained campaign of cyber, espionage and corruption. This has included meddling in elections. And, crucially, she acknowledged the weaponizing of information via social media, Russia's information warfare that was a significant part of the FBI's investigation. 3 months later, Putin sent her a weapons-grade nerve agent on a Moscow-London Aeroflot flight. But it doesn't end there. Because that April, Johnson flew to NATO's headquarters in Brussels and met the US Secretary of State and the rest of the alliance's foreign ministers. It was a crucial, highly sensitive meeting to discuss how NATO would deal with Russia ahead of its July summit. A year later, The Guardian would reveal that Johnson had traveled directly from that summit to the Italian villa of Evgeny Lebedev, the UK-based Russian newspaper proprietor. It published a photograph showing him alone and disheveled at San Francisco d'Assisi Airport, no security in sight. And 4 months after that, in November 2019, we reported in The Observer a singular fact. That Alexander Lebedev, Evgeny's father, an ex-KGB officer, had flown in to join him. Anyone with any knowledge of Russian intelligence will tell you there is no such thing as an ex-KGB officer. But, as ever in Britain, we latch on to the wrong details at the wrong time. Last week, following news reports, it became a scandal that Johnson had made Evgeny a lord against the advice of his own security services. He denies interfering in the appointment. Of course, it is. But the meeting with Alexander Lebedev is of another order. And it isn't a scandal, it's a national security failure. And it must now be investigated. The meeting with Alexander Lebedev was undertaken without a security protocol, the knowledge of his department officials, or, it must be assumed, the Prime Minister. And when it became known, Johnson should have not just been sacked, he should have been questioned by both the police and the Prime Minister. Except, by the time The Observer revealed it, Johnson was the Prime Minister. As 2022 begins, there's a New Year resolution we'd like you to consider. We'd like to invite you to join more than 1.5 million people in 180 countries who have taken the step to support us financially, keeping us open to all and fiercely independent. In 2021, this support sustained investigative work into offshore wealth, spyware, sexual harassment, labor abuse, environmental plunder, crony coronavirus contracts, and big tech. It enabled diligent, fact-checked, authoritative journalism to thrive in an era of falsehood, sensation, hype, and breathtaking misinformation and misconception. In 2022, we'll be no less active, with a cluster of elections, France, Brazil, the US to say the least, economic pinch points, the next phase of the pandemic, the gathering climate emergency, and the first Winter World Cup to keep us busy. With no shareholders or billionaire owner, we can set our own agenda and provide trustworthy journalism that's free from commercial and political influence, offering a counterweight to the spread of misinformation. When it's never mattered more, we can investigate and challenge without fear or favor. Unlike many others, Guardian journalism is available for everyone to read, regardless of what they can afford to pay. We do this because we believe in information equality. While others commoditize information, we seek to democratize it. Greater numbers of people can keep track of global events, understand their impact, and become inspired to take meaningful action. Thanks for watching.